Hello again, and welcome back to Marketing with Purpose. I'm Monica Pitts, and today Stacy and I are breaking down the new ADA Title II Web Rules and Exceptions. Yeah, say that 10 times fast. New ADA Title II Web Rules and Exceptions. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, ADA Title II specifically applies to state and local governments, and it requires them to make their services, programs, and activities accessible to individuals with disabilities. Now, in March 2024, the Department of Justice released new rules establishing specific web accessibility standards that these entities now must follow, complete with a deadline. Because what better way to motivate people, right, than with a deadline? And my friends, I feel like this deadline has been a long time coming. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which is ADA, was signed into law in 1990. And in 1996, the U.S. Department of Justice clarified that the ADA does apply to the internet. Yes, in 1996, stating that websites could be considered public accommodations under Title III of the ADA. Now, digital accessibility requirements became explicit in 1998. Then in 1999, the World Wide Web Consortium, which we call that W3C in web developer land, developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So when we talk about that, we're going to call it WCAG. And that publishes what we refer to as WCAG 1.0. Yeah, So the current policies that are expected to be held up underneath this new rule, which was released in March 2024, are actually WCAG 2.1, and they were established in 2018. 2018. So they're not new, my friends. They've just apparently been ignored by the masses until recently. The new rule is putting some heat on a lot of organizations to comply. And so I guess people just needed a deadline, right? So hats off to the ADA for giving them one.
Now, I'm Stacy Brockmeyer, and before we dig too deep, I'm going to let you know that Monica and I are going to do a little switcheroo today. Monica usually puts me in the hot seat for questioning on our podcast, Marketing with Purpose, but today I actually get to be your host, or rather your guest host, and I'm going to interview Monica about the ADA Title II Web Accessibility Rules and their exceptions. That will impact thousands upon thousands of websites across our country. So while it may create every single person is an advocate for accessibility, Monica really has been leading the charge to build ADA compliant websites for years, and she's definitely the perfect person to help us navigate the new complex, not new, because they're not new, but the regulations that now have a deadline. And so with compliance deadlines of April 26 and April 27, that is actually coming up way faster than you think. And so we're going to understand why these requirements are essential and the timelines that go along with them. So today we're going to explore who needs to comply, when they need to comply, what 5 key exceptions mean in practical terms, because I don't know if you've ever read a government website, the practical terms are really like few and far between. And we're also going to talk about who bears the ultimate responsibility when things go wrong. So if you've been wondering how and if these new rules might impact your organization or your clients, stay tuned. This is a straightforward, practical breakdown you've been looking for. Now, let's get to business.
You're on a mission, and you just need more people to know about it. And whether you're brand new to marketing or a seasoned pro, we are all looking for answers to make marketing decisions with purpose. I'm Monica Pitts, a techie, crafty business owner, mom, and aerial dancer who solves communication challenges through technology. This podcast is all about digging in and going digital. I'll share my marketing know-how and business experience from almost 20 years of misadventures. I'll be your backup dancer, so you can stop doubting and get moving towards marketing with purpose. I just want to give a quick thank you before we get started to our featured resource sponsor. what to put on your website. This is a page-by-page website content checklist, and it's one of MakeCreate's most popular free resources. It has more than 7,000 downloads. It outlines suggestions of what content to put on each page of your website in an easy-to-understand checklist format. And my nonprofit friends, we've got a special one for you. Just check the nonprofit box, and it will deliver a nonprofit-specific checklist right to your inbox. So you can download it for free at resources.makecreate.com. That's MAYECREATE.com. Or you can just click on the resources tab at the top, or you can click on the link in the show notes. You know, with April deadlines, I feel like as businesses, we have enough deadlines in Aprils, and as U.S. citizens with all the tax deadlines, it really makes me wonder why they chose April as a deadline for all of these websites to have to be updated.
Let's just make first quarter a slightly more stressful. Everyone just loves, post-holiday, stressor. I don't know. Like another post-holiday project.
Like we didn't have enough things to chew on in the new year. Now we would like to make our websites ADA compliant. Well, my friends,
let's get started now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. So if you take nothing else away from this conversation, please get started now. Please get started now, because it's not a small task, right? It's for some people, it's actually going to be pretty easy. And for others, it's going to be an undertaking, quite frankly. It'll be just like redesigning your website, maybe even more intense than redesigning your website, because you'll have to evaluate all parts of it to make sure that they're accessible. So yeah. Yay.
So, Monica, what exactly is ADA Title II Web Accessibility, and why does it exist?
So there's ADA Title II, and that specifically applies to state and local governments. Title III, that applies to businesses. And it requires both businesses and the government to make services, programs, and activities accessible to individuals with disabilities. So as I said in the intro, in 1996, the Department of Justice specifically included the internet as a service. And right now, they made these new rules because state and local governments are increasingly delivering their services through websites and mobile apps. And when these digital platforms aren't accessible, they create significant barriers for people with disabilities. And so they really feel like with increasing online services, from requesting mail-in ballots to accessing tax information, it's creating a digital divide that can exclude people with disabilities from doing anything like civic participation to actually fulfilling their own responsibilities as citizens. And so the new Title II web accessibility requirements are actually providing clear standards for governments to follow. So that way people with disabilities can have equal access to public services and programs. And I feel like these standards, believe it or not, they create a lot of clarity for governments and for businesses. And I hope that in the long run, they'll have more digital inclusion for all citizens. I actually read the website, a lot and lots of pages of the website, and I understood the words in it. What?
So you actually understood and enjoyed it.
I know. I was like, Stacy, look at this. This is crazy.
Okay. So you said ADA Title II is for governments and ADA Title III is for businesses. So what does that mean? Can you clarify that? And what does it mean when it comes to web accessibility?
So Title II applies to state and local governments and their departments or their agencies. And then Title III applies to businesses open to the public, so places of public accommodation. So, for example, a Chamber of Commerce or a CVB would comply most of the times under Title III because they are privately funded. So they're public accommodations. They wouldn't be Title II. And Title III entities, they don't have a fixed compliance deadline right now. They are expected to comply continuously under all the existing ADA obligations. They just don't have a deadline for web compliance, even though they are expected to comply. Does that make sense?
Well, and I think that the other thing to note is there are businesses on the coast that are getting sued for this. And so regardless if there's a deadline, there is an expectation to comply, and there are people who are holding them responsible.
Yes.
So
And we will get into, hopefully later, how the the expectations will be enforced.
Yeah. So when do the requirements go into effect, and why are there different deadlines for different people or different agencies?
So if you are an agency that serves a population of 50,000 or more persons, then your deadline is April 24th, 2026. So let's say that you're an agency that works for a local government and you work for a state government, then your state government is going to be bigger than 50,000 people. And so your date would be April 24th, 2026. And then if your population is from 0 to 49,999 persons, then you don't have to comply until April 26th, 2027. So yay, there you go. And then special district governments also have an extended deadline till April 26, 2027. And I think that the different deadlines are likely to acknowledge the varying resources and capabilities of different sized governments. I mean, it's like a super small town. They're just trying to keep their head above water. They're just trying to get everything done. And if you have a bigger government, then you might even have a web department that could actually facilitate these things much more efficiently.
Yeah. So today I was talking to an organization that they actually serve 7 counties. And while they're relatively rural counties, I think they will be required to comply by April of 2026 because they serve multiple counties with multiple towns in them, which would put them over that 50,000 mark.
Yes.
So Monica, talk to me about, let's kind of move into who has to comply. So which types of organizations, and I actually have some specific questions about maybe some different examples. Who's required to comply with this, with the accessibility deadlines?
This is where I got a little into the weeds and maybe got a little excited about it. So when they say government, it's not just government. The government actually provides a lot of services to us as citizens that maybe we don't think directly about. So our school district sites, our individual school websites like public schools, K through 12 districts, the library websites, obviously city, state, county sites, fire and police department sites, state universities, colleges and community colleges, public hospitals and health clinics, especially if they're government funded or part of state universities. They will probably be part of this as well. Courts and judicial systems, emergency services, parks and rec, public transit, museums and other publicly funded bodies, even third-party contractors that provide digital services to government entities, they will have to comply. And government operated tourism sites, state or county fairs, there's a lot more than I thought would be on this list. I thought, oh, well, Stacey and I are going to have to go. We're going to have to find the communities that we build websites for. We're going to have to talk to them. And then I was like, oh, my goodness, no. We're going to have to talk to a lot of people we do work for because they fall under these categories.
Well, and so we have a client, and Monica, I know you and I spoke off of this podcast a little bit about them last week. They provide the suicide prevention hotline for a pretty large population, and I think they would be in this first round of compliance, right?
Yes, if they have digital resources that they're offering on their website that is paid for, or they're a representative or a part of the government, then they would have to comply.
Yeah, so they have the government contract for the 988. So I do think they would comply or have to comply. And then the other one that I was thinking about that maybe is a little bit of a gray area is I was talking today to a community action agency. So they provide a public service. They are federally funded, but they're not necessarily a municipality or owned by the city or the state, but they do provide, housing assistance and energy assistance and training and all kinds of things to lower income people. Where would they fit in?
I think it would depend on how they're providing those services. If it's a digital service, so if they're applying for funding online, say, I think that could put them into the category of needing to comply because of the funding from the state. And then, they are serving a municipality of people, and then they have a digital service. And so that would make them need to comply. And then also the contracts, because the government can put in any contract and say that you need to comply. And so if it's in your contract, then you need to comply. You could be a paver and you could be paving streets for the Department of Transportation. And if in your contract it says that your website has to be ADA compliant, then it has to be ADA compliant, even though technically you would not be providing a digital service and you would be underneath Title III. If your contract says you have to do it, then you would need to do it.
Okay. So if you're a contractor working for a state or local government, you just mentioned like a paving contractor working for the Department of Transportation or a municipality, they do or they don't have to comply?
They don't.
Barring the contract situation.
They don't have to comply unless they're providing digital services, websites, or web applications on behalf of the state or a contractor of the state that is,
Cool. Well, that clarifies a little bit, I feel like, for a lot of our clients.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about contractors like paving contractors. We've talked a little bit about nonprofits that receive government funding. Anything else you want to share on those two topics?
I don't think so. I think we've covered it. A lot of nonprofits actually are going to fall underneath Title III ADA requirements. Even if you receive grants from the government, if you're not providing a public digital service, then no. But if you're contracted to operate a government program to provide a public service, then you would be required underneath Title II, right?
Okay. What about like state universities or colleges?
They are required to comply. And if they serve a population of 50,000 or more, then they have to comply by April 24th, 2026. And then the smaller institutions have until 2027.
I would think, I guess understanding that is really interesting because while they're, like a smaller college, their student body may not make up 50,000, but the population that they're serving would probably be over 50,000 almost every time because they're serving a state or a. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the way I was thinking about it was if it were Missouri State or the University of Missouri. I'm like, if you had the name Missouri in your university's name, I think you're going to have to comply by 2026. But if you're like, and it makes me wonder, like State Fair Community College, they're a community college, but it's a state, like they are calling themselves a state school, right? But maybe Lynn Tech wouldn't be.
Well, they're state tech now.
Oh, they're state tech. See, all these things. So I don't know, but Central Methodist might not be. They might not have to comply. And they can be a private university too. So if they're privately held, then they would probably fall underneath Title III. But yeah, as I'm giving you this advice, make sure that you check. Like, I wish that there was a hotline for this. Really, there's
I'm sorry. Can we get a 3-digit number to call and check if our website needs to be compliant?
That'd be great.
Pretty please.
Yeah. How about we just text it? It'll be great. You can even run it with a bot.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our expectations. So what are the first steps that someone needs to take and like an organization needs to take if they have found out that they need to apply? Not to apply. If they need to comply.
So I feel like first and foremost, you have to understand your deadline because I think that would make a difference of the urgency of your situation. And then you would need to learn about the requirements of the rule. And man, that's a doozy. I got to tell you, there are so many pieces of information in there. And unlike, I can't believe I'm even going to say this, unlike the ADA website, the definitions of how to make an ADA compliant website based on WCAG 2.1 is not necessarily written in English. Like, it is written in English, but it's like, it reminds me of reading tax laws. It's not super straightforward. I've read it so many times, and I've had to like literally make a sandcastle out of the information. Making spreadsheets and so many notes and writing blog posts about it and making presentations. So that way I really understood it, because it isn't like, it doesn't really read like an easy thing to read. But you will have to understand the rules requirements, so that way you can identify the web content and the mobile apps that aren't complying right now. And then you'll want to understand the rules exceptions, because there are exceptions. I am so glad that they outline these exceptions, because I have been terrified of some of these really big sites with all kinds of assets in them. And how are we going to retroactively make them all ADA compliant, like every piece of it, right? Wow, that seems like a lot. And so once you understand the exceptions, then you can decide what needs to comply, and then, prioritize the content that you need to fix first. And then also review your vendor contracts and capabilities to make sure that, like, either you can handle it yourself, or that the people that you've hired can handle it for you. And then moving forward, you'll want to create policies to move forward. I would say, especially at first, you're going to need some review checkpoints and some training, because even as you keep moving forward, let's say you have a vendor that comes in and does all this stuff for you. Well, then you might be making updates yourself. Well, if those updates aren't ADA compliant, then your website then just becomes partially compliant. It's not fully compliant anymore. And so I feel like there should be a checks and balances system, especially at first, or with anybody new working on the site, so that way they can learn the rules and then follow them, because there's just a lot of little nuances, and you'll want to make sure that after you do all this hard work, that you keep it all in order.
Well, and you may want to pay for a review by a third party every year, whether that's your web developer or a software that you purchase. So that way, if you're actually compliant, especially if you are required to under these new regulations. So you mentioned retroactively making websites comply. So talk to me a little bit about archived content. So what is the distinction between content that needs to comply and content that is exempt under the exception you were talking about?
So there's 4 criteria that has to be met for an exemption. The content has to be created before the compliance date, or sorry, I'm reading it right now as I'm saying it out loud. So the content has to be created before the compliance date, or it reproduces physical media from before the compliance date. So it's old. Let's put it there. It's old, and it didn't have to be compliant when it was made. And then the content would only be kept for reference, research, or record keeping. So it's not actively used right now. It's not something that somebody's going to go out and touch over and over again right now. And it would be in an archived area. So think past events, right? Your past events section. And then it has not been changed since it was archived. So let's say that you have a non-ADA compliant PDF that is a meeting minutes from a board meeting on your website. If it is in the archived section because it was from a past event and it's not ADA compliant and it's just for record keeping and it hasn't been changed since you archived it, it's good and it can stay exactly the way it is and it can stay over there.
Okay. What about, you kind of mentioned past events. What about if you wanted to go back to a past event and add a gallery? That would be considered changing it, right? And that would need to be ADA compliant.
Yes, it would. So I would be careful of that. And usually, though, I mean, if you think about it, your past event that you would be adding a gallery to would probably be something that was relatively recent. So that new post probably should have been ADA compliant. Now, if, for example, you have a PDF of a map for a park, like say you have trails and it's a downloadable trail map, then that PDF would need to probably be made ADA compliant because it's used all the time. right? You might even have a QR code on one of your signs at the park. And so that would need to comply. Even if you put it in the archives, it would still need to comply because it's an active living resource that people look at all the time for current information. So I do think you'll have to look at the way that people use the information to depend on whether you can get away with not updating it.
Yeah. So you mentioned PDFs. Are there any other things? So that moves us kind of into exception 2. So we talked about exception 1. Now this is exception 2. Are there other things that we need to worry about with documents that were created before the compliance date?
So if it is a word processing document, a presentation, a PDF, or a spreadsheet file that were available on the website or app before the compliance date, it can be left alone. But if either one of those conditions are missing, then you can't leave it alone. So it has to be compliant moving forward. So you have to make sure that word processing, presentations, spreadsheet files, all that stuff has to be ADA compliant moving forward if you're going to link to it from your website.
Okay. What about third-party content? Is there an exception to that? Sounds like there's some limitations for sure.
So if the third-party content is posted by the government, it has to comply. So like if it's posted on behalf of your organization by a vendor that you've hired, then it also has to comply. Like you can't just be like, oh, well, this web design company did it, and so it doesn't, it's not my problem. No, that's actually not it. It's still your problem. But if it is like a member of the public who's posting stuff, maybe in a forum, then they could give you a get out of jail free card on that one. And it might, it doesn't probably need to comply because that type of stuff is exempt because you can't control what the public is putting on there. Like say it was a review, right? And they used non-ADA compliant color in their review. I don't know. But there's things that you can put around that too. Like you can make it so the reviews only show up in a certain color. So they always have the right contrast, or that the text is big enough, the links are underlined, all that kind of stuff. And then, it would be compliant no matter what. The only thing you get in trouble with is if they post a video and it doesn't have closed captioning or something like that, then that wouldn't work. So then just don't allow them to post videos.
Yeah.
Can you see we've worked our way around this before?
Well, I also think if a member of the public made a social media graphic and posted it, not necessarily to the entity's website, but posted on social media, like those are not things you can control. So even though it might be a graphic for a public event that's hosted by the city, I don't know, we have Meet the Machines in our little town, and lots of people create graphics and share it because it's a big to do for the kids, and you just can't control that. So I don't think that really falls inside of this because it's a member of the public that's not paid by you posting information about an event that you're hosting.
Yes. I am interested though, because for example, in our school district, the students create all these graphics, and the graphics are distributed to the parents through an app, right? And none of those graphics are in any way ADA compliant. Like at all, they make me completely nuts. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I can't even hardly read this. This would not apply, but we went to an awards assembly today and we got a printout of all the awards. Well, the fonts aren't easy to read, and you can, the colors are barely legible on the background. And I just looked at my husband and I was like, this is not ADA compliant. And if they were to post it on their website, they would have only a partially compliant website because they posted this PDF up there. Like, let's get it together, people. Give me some legible fonts. But they do not appreciate it when I point these things out to them. Apparently, they don't like it when I do that.
That's funny. Okay, so talk to me about password protected documents. So this is another exception. Tell me a little bit about it.
Okay, so the exception for password protected individual documents applies when 3 conditions are met. One is that the documents are word processing, PDF, presentation, or spreadsheet files, okay? The documents need to be about a specific person, property, or account. And they have to be password protected or secured. Okay.
So does that mean like a bill, like an invoice? Is that kind of what we're talking about? Because that's a specific person or an account.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
cool.
what I'm talking about. So like if you log into a website and there's a bill there that's just for you, Stacy, then that would be something that could be exempt.
Okay.
Why it would have to be exempt, I don't know, because it's a bill. And how hard is it to make that PDF ADA compliant?
Right.
I mean, come on, people. But anyway, so then now on the flip side, let's say that there's an announcement. And this is where I was just thinking with the schools, right? So the school, yes, it is. I log into the app and I look at it, right? But that same announcement was made to all of the parents who have kids that go to this school. Okay, that does not pass. Like there's not an exception for that.
That does not meet this
Even
rule.
though
Okay.
I logged in and it's in my own login area, that announcement should always be ADA compliant, even when using a third-party app. Yeah. I'm going to have a talk with the school district. I'm over here just laughing. They're not.
Just like quietly accidentally slip this podcast into their inbox.
Like, hey, I just want to let you know you don't have very long and all the stuff needs to be compliant.
Coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the third thing you said is that it does have to be password protected,
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It has to be password protected.
Okay. All right. So what about social media? I kind of hinted at social media a minute ago. How does that work in practice?
I was actually really surprised that they even included social media in this at all because I thought websites, right? But it turns out that they are including this under the rules. And fortunately, social media posts made before the compliance date do not need to meet standards. Yes. So you don't have to go back and fix everything. Wouldn't that be horrible? Yeah. And they decided that they weren't going to enforce that because they thought it would be potentially impossible and of limited utility. That's their words exactly. Potentially impossible and limited utility, which I agree with.
That's probably accurate.
Yeah, so new posts after the compliance date would need to comply. And I am interested, I don't know the answer to this, but under ADA rules, like under the WCAG 2.1 standards, you're not supposed to have words in an image that aren't attached to an alt tag that has all of the words in the image. Like you just need to type the words into the website, not make them into a picture, basically. Because screen readers can't read images. That's what alt tags are all about. So, I mean, think about the number of social media graphics that are just riddled with riddled with words, right? Like so many words. And even our social media manager will make pictures with words on them, and I'm like, if it is not ADA compliant, I am not passing it to go up. Like for me, I'm like, well, I can't put an alt tag on it because it's a social graphic, but at the very least it has to meet contrast and font standards for ADA compliance, or I don't feel like it should go out on social for us. So I was like, it kind of makes us like a bunch of jerks who talk about compliancy but don't actually do it. But yeah,
walk
so
the walk.
I am really interested if anybody knows what the rule is going to be on pictures with images that you can't put alt tags on. I would like to know for social media because it seems like
Pictures with text that you can't put alt
sorry,
tags on.
pictures
Yeah.
with text. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other exceptions that we need to know about at this moment?
No,
Did
but I
we
am
cover
really
'em?
excited about these exceptions.
Yeah, these exceptions definitely make it a lot easier to retroactively like get things together because I can't imagine. Just like you said, we've had social media for how many years? A lot of years,
A lot of years.
So going back would be just miserable, especially all that time where we posted a lot, like multiple times a day. Whew.
Well, and who
Okay.
would care? Like they're not
Right.
Yeah, they're not using that stuff. It's
Okay, so let's move to kind of another section in talking through this responsibility and liability. So I mentioned earlier that there is some like legal ramifications for some businesses that we're seeing some of that in our industry. So Tell me about who bears the ultimate responsibility for the compliance. Is it the government entity or is it the contractor they hire? Tell me more.
It is so they're putting the responsibility on the state and local governments. That's who it is. It's kind of like your taxes. You can't say, I don't know. I didn't know. Well, it's not an excuse. Like, it's then called tax fraud, right? Like, it's not an excuse. You have to do it. And they've specifically said that you cannot contract away your responsibilities. It's something that you have to do. So the government entities or the individual businesses, like under Title III, are responsible. It's not the person that does it, not the individual person, not even your employee. Your employee isn't going to get fined if they're in charge of your website. The business would get fined, or the government entity.
So what if a web design company builds a non-compliant website for a government entity, or if we're looking at Title III, a business? Like, whose responsibility does that fall under? Is it the web design company or is it the entity?
So any government fines or lawsuits would be directed at the entity. So at the government or at the business's website. The person that paid for the website is the one that the government would go after, not the web company. Now, the web company's liability is determined by the contract between the parties, not the ADA. Okay, so it's your contract together. And the entity, like the business or the government agency, could have contractual remedies against the vendor. Like, they could make them make revisions to the site. They could, I don't know, they could take them to court if they wanted to. But the ADA is not going to go after the web developer. They're going after the government entity or the business.
Yeah, the owner of the website.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how should organizations address their accessibility requirements in those contracts with vendors?
I would include specific accessibility requirements, like say that it needs to be WCAG 2.1 AA compliant, because that's what it has to be. And you could actually ask them, to prove it to you. Like, give me the report, tell me what programs that you use to do this. Add warranties and indemnification clauses. Like, we have them anyway in our contract just because we feel like it's good business. Include monitoring and enforcement provisions. So as things move forward, if you really do think you're going to be a target, then you just have to keep monitoring it, right? You can't it's not a one and done thing. So it may be that you have to have an audit on your website however often to make sure that it's okay. And then specify remedies if the site isn't as compliant or isn't compliant as claimed, right? So what happens if it's not compliant? And then consider terms for fixes, damages, or contract termination. So all those types of things would be in your contract with your web vendor. Well, and vet them, make sure that they're like good. You could just do like anybody else, call their references, right?
Well, and I think too, just allocating some funding each year to making sure that you can do those accessibility scans again, because like you said, if you add an image that doesn't have an alt tag, well, now your website's only partially compliant. So just making sure that within your contractual agreement that you have funding allocated to make sure that this is something that you still comply with.
Yeah, for ongoing training or reports or whatever it is.
So what happens if somebody chooses not to comply?
Okay, so federal fines, whoop, whoop. All right, so the first time apparently that they're going to fine you, it could be up to $75,000. And then if they fine you again, it could be $150,000. You can be sued. So the Department of Justice can sue you, or there could be private lawsuits with damages. There can be corrective mandates, and so that just means you're going to have to redesign your website or hire an expert or adopt monitoring to make sure it doesn't. You could lose your federal funding. Yeah, you could lose your grants.
That's terrifying for some of these like nonprofit agencies that do so much for our communities.
It is terrifying. It is. I mean, but
But
ADA
it's so
compliance
important.
isn't just for people with disabilities. It's for everyone. It's good web design. It's smart web design. It's not punitive. It's actually awesome. And the fact that you can just do this, like build websites with zero training and absolutely no knowledge about what you're supposed to be doing is kind of scary, right?
Yeah, it really is.
And so if everybody followed these rules, it would really be better. Like the internet would be a better place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so also, if you choose not to comply, this kind of just like piggybacks on what I just said. Like think about your reputation, right? Like you just, you don't care if people can use your website or not. And I know that it seems like, oh my gosh, well, we're just talking about a small population with disabilities, but it's not just like everybody has like a moment where they're trying to use a website and it just doesn't work the way you think it would. And a lot of the time it's because it's not following the right rules, right? And that's not just people who can't see, that's everyone. Like, and you don't ever want people to feel like that. Like
anyone from color blindness to a physical disability that can't use a mouse to full blindness to, I mean, there's just so many things that can make people have a hard time using a website. And so it's not just a little, like, we're not talking about like 7 people here. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. So how will they know if they're compliant or not?
That is a wonderful question. So I had to look this up. Like I was very interested in this. I did a lot of reading on it. So to answer that question, I'm going to go back to how they handle physical ADA compliance. Like, let's say, you have to have an elevator, you have to have a wheelchair ramp. So physical ADA compliance for businesses is primarily complaint driven. So there's no routine government inspection process for the ADA accessibility. It's like the government entity or the business is just expected to comply. Like it's your responsibility to do it, right? So usually the process starts with public complaints and lawsuits, not through government inspections. So businesses and the agencies are expected to self-assess and then address the accessibility issues, but enforcement only occurs after someone reports a problem or files a legal claim. And the ADA does not plan to introduce any new or specialized enforcement mechanisms for the web accessibility rules under Title II. It's going to rely on the existing enforcement framework managed by the U.S. Department of Justice. So self-governing, public complaints, Department of Justice audits, boom. That's what it is. So don't make people mad. Be nice. Karma's real.
Be nice to people. That way they don't come back at your website.
Yeah, karma's real. So real.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics a little bit.
Just a
feels
tiny
like,
bit.
man, we've talked a little bit about specifics, but man, it feels like you can get into the weeds with everything. So what standards of the WCAG 2.1 must websites meet to be compliant? So I know there's different levels. So we've got single A, double A, and triple A. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that double A is the one that we're going for, right? So kind of that middle of the road.
Yeah.
Compliance. Okay.
Yeah. So double A is the compliance standard that's set forth. And man, there are so many pieces of it, but I want to talk about it at like a super big picture level so you can get an idea of some of these things. So I think of compliance in 2 groups. There's the black and white group, and then there's the gray area. Okay, so the black and white group is like you got it or you don't. It's like checkboxes, right? And then there's the gray area, and that's where you have to discern whether or not you make it or not. And I read an article recently in a newsletter that I got from multidots.com. So they gave me a really good framework of how they think about it, and I'm going to share their framework with you within my black and white and gray standards. So black and white compliance, their framework would describe it as perceivable. So Number one is perceivable. Number two is operable. So perceivable means that people with disabilities should be able to perceive content in more than one way. So this would be alt text for images, captions for videos, and transcripts for audio, a strong contrast between your text and your background, text that can be resized. So all of those different things, okay? And there are things that like literally browser add-ons that you can put in Chrome that will test for every single one of these things. Well, it doesn't test for captions on videos, but you can see if they're there or not, right? So these are all black and white things. So the second one, and I think this is one of the things that gets a little lost if you're building a website on your own or if you're not as educated, is operable. So users should be able to interact with your site in multiple ways. Like, for example, full keyboard navigation. No need to use a mouse. Actually, this is one mouse. Like, it's one of my favorite things to test.
Well, and it really is, because so I had a personal contact who really only had control of their like two fingers on their one hand. So they really only had control of their pointer finger and their middle finger on one hand. And there was no using a mouse. And so being able to like navigate with your arrows or tabs, like crucial for people like that. And it's just so important. I don't think people think about those who don't have the physical capability of using a mouse very often. And it's so important.
I was actually really thankful that I learned how, well, okay, so anybody who's filled out a form knows what it's like to, tab through fields, right? So much faster than using your mouse all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But as I was really learning about this in the beginning and understanding what it was, I practiced going on websites and going through them without using my mouse. And then now when I get into a broken website, that is my default. I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to try to go through it with my arrow keys or with my space bar or with my tabs. And now I can work some broken websites that don't work with my mouse. So I'm glad that I got to learn that. So yeah, full keyboard navigation, no need to use a mouse. Your buttons and links have to be easy to identify. So if it looks like a link, it needs to be a link. And if it's a link, it needs to look like a link. I mean, it's not that hard, right? But people keep screwing it up.
But there was a website I was on today that had board meeting minutes on it. And even if it said, like, it was like had the date and it said no meeting, it was still formatted like a button, just like the one with the PDF above it, because I didn't have a meeting that time, but it still looked like a button.
Like,
I was like, I can't click on it. And it's like, oh, it literally doesn't have a link, so.
Yeah. I will be the girl that clicks on the stuff that isn't actually a link. It's great.
Yeah.
And then no flashing content that can cause seizures. That kind of stuff is really rude. And there's a lot more things underneath operable as well, but those are just 3 simple examples that, so the black and white compliance items are that it has to be perceivable or operable. These are check boxes. Yes or no, does it do it, right? And then there's this gray area of compliance. It needs to be understandable. It needs to be robust. Okay, so understandable, this is where I feel like whenever I do site reviews, and we do them for free all the time, people will be like, well, review my site. And I'm like, I don't even know where to start with this thing. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, what is on this page? Like, I can't even tell what you do. Okay, that's not understandable, right? But to them, somehow it was. I don't know how they got there, but somehow it was understandable, right? But little things like clear instructions for filling out forms, consistent menus and navigation that don't move all over the place and change on every page that you're on, simple readable language, words that make sense. Maybe just don't put all the words in all caps. That would be great. And then robust, right? So your site should work well with assistive technologies such as screen readers, screen magnifiers, and voice input tools. So I put these in the gray compliance area because understandable, it's harder to tell, right? Because you built it was inside your own head. Is it really understandable? I don't know, because you can have some really creative navigational designs, but like some of them are understandable and others aren't. And some of your text makes sense and some of it doesn't. Even the layout of your page, right? And then also, how do you know if a screen reader can use it? I don't know. So it's a gray area, and it's something but it's still part of compliance. Okay, so we have a post which is my ADA crash course post. And you can read through all the different things there. I go into even more details about what it is to be compliant. But then also in the show notes, we're going to have a link to the WCAG 2.1 AA everythings. And you can go through it and read the legalese that is this guide. Try to interpret it for yourself.
So we talked about how different people have deadlines of April 26th and April 27th. So when should they, like, what's their timeline? What should it look like?
Oh man, you need to start yesterday. If you have a huge site, seriously, I feel like in the next month, the next few weeks after listening to this podcast or finding out about this deadline, you need to have a meeting and you need to like follow those action steps, prioritize your high traffic and essential services. It's for some people, it will be easier to rebuild their websites than it will be to retrofit what they have. So you're going to have to find somebody who can do it. You're going to have to plan it out. You're going to have to get on their calendar, and then you're going to have to go through the whole build process.
Mm-hmm.
And for some websites, like, I mean, our turnaround is, 3 months. But then there's other websites that are huge, and it could take you 6 months to get that stuff sorted, right? So you'll have to have testing. Oh, gosh. Start now. Start now. Why do you think we're reading about this now?
Don't expect that if you decide that this is important to you in March of 2026 that your web developer is going to have time to get it done between then and April 24th, 2026.
Well, because if you needed your taxes done, on the due date, April, what is it? This year it was the 15th?
15th, yeah.
If you went to your accountant on the 14th, they can't get it done.
Right.
I mean, your web developer is not any different. Luckily, if you haven't ticked somebody off that's going to report you and try to get you sued, then you could be okay, maybe. I'm not going to tell you to do it, but
yeah.
Remember how they're enforcing the rules, friend. It's
never know how you're going to tick somebody off tomorrow on accident. Okay, so we have their time frame. Talk to me about just resources that they can use to understand the requirements. So you mentioned that there is going to be a link in our show notes to the WCAG 2.1. Mm-hmm. What else do we have?
I would go to ada.gov and go to their resources section. They have a lot of different posts. We can link to them in these show notes as well. They're easy to read. They're easy to understand. I can't believe I'm saying that. Thank you so much, ADA. It's like you followed your own rules, my friends. I am so proud of you. So go over there and read it. ada.gov. Resources.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Did we cover it all? Do we have more? What do you think? Did we get there? I don't know. I feel like we could talk for days and days and days.
I feel like we may have to have a follow-up episode with more about what has to be, what do you have to look at? Like, what are the individual components? Because I think that's where it gets tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what are what misconceptions have you encountered so far about the new rules?
Well, I've actually spoken to quite a few organizations in my town that have just called me. I'm not their web developer, but they just called me because they know me and they know I do this. And they're like, oh my gosh, Monica, this person says I have to do this, right? And they're like, well, it's going to cost me X number of dollars. And I'm like, actually, that, so this company is telling them they can do it for them. It's going to cost them X number of dollars. And they think, oh, that's too expensive. And I'm here to tell you that if they're not charging you like more than thousands of dollars, it's not expensive. I don't even know if they're doing their job, quite frankly, unless your website has very little remediation to do.
$300.
Yeah, they're like, happening. It's like $300. I'm like, oh, well, that's cheap. I mean, like, that's not bad. So I don't think it's inexpensive if you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing, which is why I feel like you may be better off just rebuilding your site than trying to fix what you've got, because that's a lot of work. Also, the scope of requirements, they don't understand. They don't understand what it is. And and they think a plugin is just going to fix it. Like, I buy this plugin and then it's going to work. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that plugin's going to fix like 2 things. And it may give you a guideline to move forward as you're putting content in your site. But it's not going to fix it. Like, you can't keep doing things the way that you're doing it. The way that you're doing it is not ADA compliant. Just because you have a plugin doesn't make the way that you're doing it ADA compliant. It's still not compliant. It is what it is. And then they think it's a one-time thing, and we talked about that multiple times. And then they also, they don't necessarily understand that they're responsible. And it's not a punitive thing, man. It's like a human thing. Like, you need to be kind to your neighbor, like include everybody. It's not like I don't like the scare tactics that people are using to try to convince people to buy their ADA products, like, or their service. I'm like, that's crap. Like, that's not it. Like, you should want to do it because it's the right thing, right? It's the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely the right thing. I just feel so strongly that anyone should be able to use your website. If only everyone felt that way, I suppose.
Yeah. It's like bringing treats to school. And I'm like, well, I can make them gluten-free and I can make them dairy-free. But then there's always some kid that can't have one thing. And I'm like, do I have to have 2 treats that I bring for the class party? Like, everybody should get a treat. And anyway.
Yeah, it's hard. It's so hard.
Mm-hmm.
So in wrapping this up, what advice would you give an organization who is just beginning their accessibility journey? Maybe this is the first time they've heard about it, or maybe they just know it needs to be done, but they don't really know a lot about it. Tell us what you would tell them.
I would say to ground yourself in the why. Like, why are we doing this, right? And I know I've touched on this many, many times throughout this podcast, but it makes your website easier for everyone to use, and it's respectful, and it's not punitive. It's something that everyone should have been doing all along. They just didn't. And so just like, do your audit, understand where you fall short, and learn how to fix it, but really ground yourself in that why. Quite frankly, if you have a non-ADA compliant website, there's probably a lot of people who are frustrated with the way that it works. I know there's a lot of city websites that I've used that stink. They're horrible, and I hate using them. And I'm a citizen of this town, and I hate the website, right? Not the town I live in right now, but you know what I'm saying. And you don't want to make people feel like that. You want them to be proud that they live here. You want them to engage in the services that you offer. You want them to be part of your community. And when you don't have a good resource for them to do that through, you're alienating them, regardless of whether it's ADA compliant or not. So you're doing yourself a favor. You're doing them a favor. Just remind yourself why you're doing it. It might be painful, but remember the why.
So my last question is, how is this going to evolve or expand in the future?
That is a great question. Okay, so we know that WCAG has evolved to 2.1, right? Mm-hmm. And it was at 1.0. So it keeps evolving, because as the services and languages of, like, as browsers evolve, all this stuff evolves, right? And so the compliance is going to evolve too. So I think it's going to be a moving target, and that's okay, because that makes sense. And I do feel like in the future, there could be a possible expansion to Title III entities with firm deadlines. And I really wonder if there could be like a digital accessibility, like enforcement, like a way for the public to submit a form telling people that this website isn't quite right. And it could be like an audited AI crawl of your site that could report back to the agency. I mean, this could be a great way for the government to make $75,000 a pop, my friend.
Oof, duh.
And all they have to do is buy a software that does ADA audits. I'm just saying. Sorry, the business owner in me, it just came out there for a second.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look outside of the US, the EU, by June 2025, the EU has a deadline for e-commerce websites, online banking and finance platforms, streaming and entertainment platforms, travel and transportation booking websites, and ebook platforms. All of them have to be WCAG 2.1 AA compliant by June 2025.
That means
they're not government entities.
That means the layout's going to change on all my streaming and all my book websites, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding.
You know what? I might not mind that on some of them.
I won't mind it because they're terrible sometimes.
They're horrible. Yes.
Like, can we sort this, please, somehow? I don't know.
I know. How do I find all the titles that are like, I don't know. The sort and filter features on my ebook apps are not very good.
They're not great. Not great at all.
Not great.
So
it's not great. Yep. So that's where I think it's going in the future.
Oh, man. Seems like a heavy topic. It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Okay, friends. Well, I will wrap us up here because I know Stacey's not used to all the weird banter at the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Stacey, for asking me all these fun questions. You know how I like to geek out about this kind of stuff. And if you enjoyed this episode or you learned a thing or two, please subscribe so that way you won't miss our next episode of Marketing with Purpose. In our last episode, we actually talked about battling bots because there's been a huge rise in bot traffic. Bots have officially taken over. 51% of the traffic on the internet right now is bots. So humans are now an internet minority. And if you want to know how to protect your website and make sure that your Google Analytics actually makes sense and keep it running quickly and not get hacked, hey, go over to our last episode because that's what we just talked about. I just want to give one more quick thank you to our Make Create resource sponsor, What to Put on Your Website. Now, in this checklist, you'll find the must-haves for every page of your site, tips on how to make the most of your content, and practical advice to help guide you through creating your website. You can download your copy for free at resources.makecreate.com. That's MAYECREATE.com, or you can click on the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Don't be afraid to use that link in the show notes to go over and enjoy the fully formatted blog post with all the pictures broken down, covering every single thing that we talked about today. Because your next step is to put this information to action. And until next time, go forth and market with purpose.